This new System Shock game has been a very long time coming. A remake of the 1994 classic rather than a remaster or port like the enhanced editions of the past decade, System Shock is built into a brand new engine. By mimicking the look and controls of a modern immersive sim, this game seeks to make the original game more approachable to modern audiences. When future port house Night Dive Studios acquired the rights to the System Shock franchise, you could almost see CEO Stephen Kick's eyes filling with stars. The System Shock games, including the 1994 original, and to a greater extent its 1999 sequel, were critically acclaimed cult horror PC gaming favorites, but their publisher Electronic Arts had abandoned them, and through some legal maneuvering, the rights of the franchise wound up with an insurance company seemingly locked away forever. You could still find copies of both games on eBay or via alternate means through the aughts, but getting a hold of legal versions was nearly impossible. Night Dive wanted to change that. Kick and his team started out simple enough by bringing System Shock 2 to digital storefronts pretty much exactly as it originally existed, but able to work on modern computers of 2012. They then took on the task of getting the original game to work on those same modern machines, which was a more difficult task. The result was 2015's System Shock Enhanced Edition, which was still functionally the game, preserved as originally released. But Night Dive was still not done with System Shock, not even close. And this is where I point out that this is a supplementary video to my System Shock series review, which you should really watch before we go too much deeper if you haven't already. Night Dive went three ways from here with System Shock while they resurrected other gaming favorites like Turok, Forsaken, and Strife. They wanted to enhance System Shock 2 with a variety of support, a working co-op mode, plus so much more, an undertaking they recently re-unveiled as the System Shock 2 Enhanced Edition. They also wanted to make the Enhanced Edition of the original game even more robust with a source port version that would include fancy things like 4K support and mouse look, releasing in 2018. But their third and final prong was to remake the original game from the ground up in the new Unity engine, so that it could look and feel like a modern game. While the original game is a gem, there's so much of its design that won't appeal to modern audiences. This is compounded by the fact that even in the mid-90s, it wasn't a commercially successful game either. This remake would be called, very simply, System Shock. So in 2016, Night Dive took to Kickstarter, back when crowdfunding AA games was still a thing, and raised $1.35 million. You can tell they were very excited about this because, as all high-powered Kickstarters did at the time, they had a ton of developer videos and mapped out a bunch of stretch goals as they surpassed their original $900,000 ask. We were just a few $100,000 shy of VR support, but they did recruit System Shock's original concept artist, Rob Waters, while also providing a pre-alpha demo to give everyone a taste of where they wanted to go, and it took a long time for them to get here. The game originally recruited writing talent like Chris Avallone to enhance the storyline, plug narrative plot holes, and spruce up the dialogue, which definitely needed sprucing. They transitioned from Unity to Unreal because it was better for the shooter they wanted to make. As development progressed, their scope kept growing, and 2 years in, the game was put on ice as they figured out what to do with it. The game got regular Kickstarter updates, but flew under the radar as it set release dates and missed them regularly. They partnered with publisher Prime Matter at the tail end of 2021, right as I was putting together my previous System Shock video, to help them get across the finish line. Nearly 3 decades after its inspiration found its way to store shelves in big cardboard boxes, and nearly 7 years after gamers approved this new game with their wallets, System Shock is finally here. So, what is this game? And who is it for? Let's remember Citadel together yet again. It may not be the first, but it is the nth review, number 20, for System Shock, brought to you by my patrons at patreon.com/the nth review.
I'll make you a deal. You cooperate and I'll give you the implant you tried to steal, surgery and all.
Lamar went into beta to check the conduit, but he hasn't come back.
I should have never accepted this assignment.
Triumph has made the decision to destroy the station. You'll need to carry it out.
I will leave you here to die, enemy, along with the rotting corpses
Of your pathetic species.
No matter how hard they dress up the introduction, which we'll get back to later, this new System Shock is a hardcore game that isn't here to hold your hand, an apple that doesn't fall far from the tree. It is a shockingly accurate translation of the original game, and in this chapter we're going to go over what they brought over. Series vets may be surprised when they emerge in Citadel Station's medical level and snap in the game's interface piece by piece, just like they did before. Newcomers will quickly realize how resourceful and curious they need to be even as they're playing on the easiest difficulty. I'm not joking when I say that I had to occasionally pull out a pen and paper and make notes, some of which I only knew to make note of because I'd played the game before. You must absolutely be prepared to not know what the hell to do as you work through the levels of Citadel Station. I mean, there were a couple times where even I was stuck and I just played the original game a year and a half ago. This is not a game that pops up with little banners and plays audio stings when you complete objectives. For the big stuff, Shodan will send you a threatening communique, but then and now, you are very much on your own in System Shock. This game, despite its polish and vast amounts of quality of life improvements over the 1994 original, is scary in a horror sense, but also in the same way that Homework was scary as a kid. If you're down for that, if you're down for exploring this nonsensical station and ridding the universe of Shodan forever, here we go. I played this game on the default 222 difficulty, so everything I described could potentially be easier or more difficult. I'm not really going to dive into the story too much in this video because I've already done that elsewhere, except to say that you're a hacker waking up from a medical coma on this massive tri-optimum space station floating around Saturn after a violent massacre. The station's sentient hyper-optimized data access network has gone rogue, and you're the one who did the deed to help out a criminally unethical executive, Edward Diego. So now you have to defeat Shodan, except she's had a 6-month head start on you by making hostile robots and growing terrible mutations to slow you down to death. These levels, 9 in all, entice exploration as the minimap fills in. But these levels, which by my guesstimation are about 80 to 90% similar to the original layouts, are effectively non-linear. As you peek around corners and uncover new hallways, 2 or 3 new paths will typically unfurl before you, and you, being but one hacker, can regretfully only choose one to start. Similarly, you can even skip over chunks of these levels without much penalty. You will also absolutely 100% get lost, like you would in the bowels of a Minecraft cavern. It's just inevitable. Without a guiding hand, exploration is mandatory. You have to discover stuff. You have to dig through the cabinets of the world for ammo and the station's audio logs for clues about how to accomplish your next objective when the game won't tell you outright. And it will work very hard to not tell you outright. For the most part, playing this new game was like walking down memory lane with echoes of my playthrough of the original game rattling around in my head. Often, I expected things to be placed exactly as they were in the original game, and the vast majority of the time, they were. The open-ended gameplay and level design turns the entire station into a playground of discovery. You aren't being dragged along a chain or linear sequence of fight or stealth sequences capped by cutscenes. You're doing this work on your own, figuring things out and cashing in on your own rewards. It's obtuse in its goals and objectives, but it makes playing it so much more rewarding if you can get past its initial trials. The memorable sprite-based enemies of the original game, which became increasingly comical as you progressed, and their numbers multiplied, were clearly a product of their time. Here, with Waters' help, they've been faithfully updated based on his original sketches in 3 full dimensions. They still act the same and carry their distinct silhouettes, but they now have volume to them and are more intimidating than ever. Yes, even the cliff racers. But to work in this new game in a new era, your opponents tend to blend into the environments more, especially those little self-destructing remote droids. Still, 3 decades of technology has allowed the floating drone lamps their time to literally shine. It's allowed the cyborgs to poke and prod with their head-mounted Borg lasers. Even the horrific gorilla zebras have jiggly fur now. Fans of the original game will be relieved by the fact that the mostly invisible floor mantas from maintenance have been removed in favor of floating explosive organic orbs. I'm not joking, it's a huge step up. Like the original game, this version avoids the scarcity deserts of the sequel by having tons of guns and ammo available at pretty much all times. Let me put it another way. There's scarcity, it's just not in how much weaponry you can pick up, but we'll come back to that. You'll encounter so many different kinds of ammo for different kinds of weapons that there were points in the end game where I had to toss guns out because I had so many. You'll still have to manage guns that use energy versus weapons that have specialized ammo, and you'll have an inventory to manage versus the long lists of stuff in the original, but that's just fine. You can't expand your inventory space like you can in other immersive sims, but there's really only one reason why this becomes an issue, and I'll also talk about that later. And then there are the game's puzzles, an absolute unit of nostalgic gameplay, carefully deployed to literally gate your progress, or sometimes in a never-ending stream to make sure you're really serious about moving forward. These are as exciting and as frustrating as they have ever been. Based on a pair of archetypes, one involving snaking a line of power from one node to another, and the second involving routing just enough power to fill a meter, it's fun to guess, test, and deduce these things to completion. If you're trying and just not figuring it out, you can almost always whip out a logic probe to auto-solve them and move on. But where the game suffers is in how doggedly adherent it is to the original game's design. Yes, this game may have all the fun new shading and hair and lighting effects you could ever want, but after 7 years, Night Dive has still effectively created an Ultra HD remake of that original game. It's based on a classic, but a classic that still has some deeply rooted flaws, related in large part to just how old its source material is. This game's story is still beat for beat based on the original story and characters. If you're a fan of System Shock 2's constant narrative intervention and have been holding off on playing the original, whether it's the enhanced edition or in this remake, you're probably going to be put off by a villain who isn't consistently in your head demeaning you. This Shodan is more of a wallpaper antagonist, with most of her taunts coming through past tense audio logs to other characters, including her own drones. These spaces are still largely dictated by their original graph paper-esque layouts, but the level dress obfuscates this to some extent. In an era before stairs were practical, you'll find a few ramps to move you between levels, but tons and tons and tons of lifts, so be prepared to flip a lot of switches to move around. There are ladders here, and Night Dive gets a ton of bonus points for probably making the best ladder system in any game ever. In keeping with the spirit of the original, you're not going to be grappling ledges, even if it seems like you should absolutely be able to. To counter this, you can acquire a series of increasingly powerful jet boots that allow you to boost up to higher ledges, which is a godsend about halfway through the game. The levels, faithful to the original game, highlight how poorly they've aged when dressed with modern graphics. They feel borderline nonsensical in areas, and their puzzle-like construction becomes a liability not just when you're lost, but when you haven't unlocked that level's respawn point, and you have to tunnel back to where you were at from another level, which this game thankfully allows for instead of forcing you to reload from a save. Finding these respawn stations is entirely on you. The game doesn't care how long your run back takes. These layouts feel far more like someone with a pencil and an eraser drawing out a game's levels by hand to fit within the virtual space they were allowed to build these into. This leads to a lot of repetitive, tile-based rooms and corridors that lack many distinguishing features or landmarks, and 30 years has not changed that. You'll also want to make sure you find the power rechargers so you can continue to use those jet boots or a bunch of your weaponry, as well as medical beds to top off your health. Unfortunately, those are particularly rare, so unless you're willing to run back a few levels to access one, potentially incurring damage along the route, chances are you're going to spend a lot of time playing the game with the default half-filled health meter from the respawn station. This forces you to be a bit more conservative with your gunplay and lean around corners, but you can also just save scum. You'll find security cameras throughout the station that serve as Shodan's eyes and ears, but only in the most abstract sense. Unlike the second game, where they'll set off an alarm and spawn a ton of enemies on top of you, they're really just here to gate progress. Several doors here will only unlock when you've destroyed enough cameras and data nodes, eliminating Shodan's digital capacity on the level. How often you have to manage this isn't terribly consistent, so it's helpful to just destroy them wherever you can find them. Of all of this game's levels that could have used a more thorough update, however, is level 7, Systems Engineering, roughly 3/4 of the way through the game. This is the closest that either System Shock gets to driving the player insane. It is a monstrosity of a maze with multiple levels of interconnected maintenance tunnels. If you have ever fantasized about navigating a rat's nest, this is the game and the level to try it out. While I'd found the medical bed and respawn station relatively early on when I played the original game, it took me a bit longer to find it this time around, which meant a lot of corpse runs from the previous level. And I use the term corpse run loosely because you don't actually need to find your corpse. This was a particular nightmare because accessing the elevator to move between those two particular levels takes a long ass time, and I never did find the shortcut despite my mostly diligent playing. Before I found that respawn station, I was safe scumming my way to victory. This was even when I only had 1 or 2 pips of health left, leaving me vulnerable to even an awkward glance from one of Shodan's servants. Your mileage in this game will vary. The review guide suggested a 6-hour easy run and a 30+ hour completionist run on a higher difficulty. I clocked about 25. I have no idea how you beat this game in 16 hours, much less 6. So if someone played that little of this game to meet the embargo deadline, then that review is almost completely useless, unless your channel is like, we only play games for 6 hours and then review them. There are some other fun things that they kept from the original game though. You can still fire the station's mining laser prematurely and destroy a metropolis on Earth, which leads to a game over. It was a neat twist then, it was a great re-inclusion now. You'll also need to keep track of the numbers that generate as you take out data node clusters in each of the 6 levels. Remember those? They're back. So with all that they've pulled from the original game, let's talk about everything that Night Dive installed while updating this adventure. When you reviewed the first and second System Shock games, you had a part about Shodan. My impression was, man, he sure loves Shodan, but then I played System Shock 2 for the first time. I get it now. Patreon assistant producer MX. It's true that there is a genuine appeal to Shodan as a villain. I spent over 20 minutes exploring her origins and motivations in that video. Whether it's Darth Vader, Antonio Salieri, or the Wicked Witch of the West, there's something that stories do to humanize them that makes them sympathetic figures that we kinda don't want to lose. Villains that are completely unrelatable are paradoxically bad, forgettable villains. So we all have a favorite villain that we're fans of, even if we're not exactly rooting for their unethical conduct or cheering on their terrible deeds. If you're familiar with the original game at all, the most immediate thing you'll notice playing this new System Shock is the dramatic change of look. Namely, it looks better. There are a lot more details in this world. Lots and lots and lots more details. There is so much detail that you may be thrown off by the fact that these are elaborately dressed up versions of levels from the original game, which look relatively absurd in comparison. This game isn't a technical masterpiece, there's no path tracing or anything like that here, but I think the game is very pretty. This sheer amount of detail, especially along walls and surfaces, is so deluxe that it will slow down any discerning player trying to pick out useful things. There are so many displays, control surfaces, and modules embedded into all of these planes that you'll think that they're functional when they are definitely not. Whether you're in maintenance, medical, or wandering around the board-greebled bridge section that sheds the Giger-esque gothic alien look from the original game. This game is so afraid of an uninterrupted, smooth surface that your eyes are constantly overwhelmed by detailed geometry, whether actual 3D geometry or painted details. There's so much going on in nearly every single frame of this game. If you've played the original game, you may be tempted to pick out a digital hammer and chisel and pound away at the new facades to reveal the smooth original panels underneath. But unlike the finale of the second game, which wove in a small chunk of Citadel Station from Shodan's memory, this game doesn't take the bait. As a result of this greebling, the actual useful items of the world blend in much easier without outlines or some more effective post-processing effect beyond a latent sheen. So how will you know that things are interactive or useful? Well, they have lights. Or they look like guns. Actually, there are a lot of things you can interact with and pick up in this world that don't have lights and aren't guns, which we'll get back to. My favorite part are the brief moments you get external views, something that was technically impossible in the original game. These aren't just passing glances at the station's modeled exterior, but opportunities to really soak in the scope of the setting. Saturn's out there and it will gradually rotate out of view if you'll let it. From the flight deck or the executive offices, you can see the garden groves perched atop their armatures. From the groves, you can look back and see the flight deck inside it, or see parts of the space station you have yet to infiltrate. Combined with the lack of load screens, granted they're masked by elevators, this remake really installs a sense of place, that you are really moving through levels of the same location. Of course, this is only if you can suspend your disbelief that anyone would craft such chaotic spaces inside the station's iconic silhouette. There's also Trioptimum branding everywhere. Everywhere! If you ever need a reminder of which futuristic megacorporation owns and manages this station, you're never that far from a door with its glowing logo, or a coffee mug, glowing wall display, corporate award, skyscraper, load screen, main menu, or other vainglorious representation. The brand is so effectively carpet bombed into your psyche that all the horrific stuff they get away with seems almost banal. That said, if Night Dive sold a high quality Trioptimum whiskey in one of these bottles, I would totally be down for that. Throughout the station, you'll also find elements that seem more visually congruent with the second game than the first. There are bucket benches everywhere, even in standalone rooms that make no sense, like on the Von Braun, 42 years later. Everything from the UI to the acid green digital details to Shodan's evil and non-evil designs rhymes more with Irrational's game than the Looking Glass original. While the game isn't a graphics revolution, it's great to see its lighting and particle effects in action, but something you may notice in the footage is a slight disparity in graphical quality between clips. Early on I played with some moderate to high settings on this 7-year-old PC, and it seemed to perform okay. As soon as I landed in the bigger, more memory-intensive levels though, performance would typically grind to a halt as it chunked in new sections. I believe it's even why the game would reveal the exterior Citadel model during loads in medical early on after a respawn. On the reactor level it got particularly bad, but on the flight deck with its massive open bays, I finally had to dial the graphics down a notch across the board. Actually, this is the point where I began to experiment with how well the game performed at its highest and lowest levels. With the mid-level settings I went with, I actually got to avoid a lot of the annoying dark shadows that made this game so aesthetically and tonally dark. Speaking of which, this game is absolutely 100% darker than the original, which I loved for all of its bright, sometimes even pristine white paneling. It was as delightful as its enemies, even more so, because it gave each level character, even if it really was a technical limitation of the time. But this new game, particularly in its first and final acts, looks more like a horror game with spaces shrouded in darkness. It's actually kind of off-putting because some of those middle levels are really gorgeous and visually captivating, but they're sandwiched between grungy dungeons, and that's a bit of a bummer. Even as the whole game is darker, while the levels seemed more evenly lit when they originally showed it off, this final game is more high contrast and exciting. There are truly deep darks and decent highlights here, particularly with its system-wide implementation of colorful neon and sugary lighting. Naturally, the original game didn't have the technical ability to portray lighting with this kind of fidelity. The game lets you play with light switches, but the lights are usually already on, and then your option is to turn them off, which is just silly. But those mid-station levels where light does get to shine in are easily the most memorable. The executive levels where you're scouring offices with custom-made furniture and ruffled blankets are so much fun. This remake even remembers how much fun the original game had with different door designs and animations. A nitpick, as well implemented as these executive suites are, the wood-paneled geometrically accented look that we've already seen in BioShock and Prey, which is itself a bit of a spiritual System Shock game, is well-worn territory. The station's garden groves, filled with Shodan's bizarre animal mutations, have been redesigned for this game, and they are a breath of fresh air. My complaints about the game's burdensome light levels aside, the broad palettes of both the Enhanced Edition and this remake highlight just how drab and boring System Shock 2 looks. Of course, this remake's horror ambitions are matched by how thoroughly they've updated the gore from the splashy cartoon sprite guts of the original game. Yes, the first mutants you battle have weirdly bloated features, but the disheveled remains you find around the world are anatomically correct, squishy, and incredibly unsettling. Fleshy guts, blood everywhere, moist innards, smashed bones and skulls, this game has them all in spades. It's a great reminder of how truly vicious and depraved Shodan's violence is. One downside to their implementation here is that sometimes the bloody graffiti blends into the walls, rather than popping out like it did originally, which really lessens their power. I can't quite quantify it, but there are fewer enemies in this game than the original. It was very easy for that game to swarm you with baddies, especially when the game ratcheted up the dramatic tension after you've really pissed off Shodan. But here, there are fewer foes to handle at a time, typically one or two, which lessens the stress of the horror, but also makes it more meaningful. With the larger, meaner enemies you encounter in the higher decks, each encounter feels more like a duel and feels really good when managing your combat arsenal, which we'll get back to in a little bit. This game still respawns enemies, but it doesn't do it at the quantity of the original game or with the nerve of the second. I will make a note here that the enemies of this game make you wonder if Night Dive installed their character physics last week. Everything feels nearly weightless in this game, and enemies ragdoll on death like their namesake verb. Because of the complexity of their models, they also tend to just sit there and vibrate for a long time, when other games have the common sense to turn off their physics after an arbitrary period of time. The new UI is leagues beyond the original, of course. No longer do you need a secondary interface to reload your weapons or accomplish basic tasks. You no longer have to enter a secondary interface and click on a gun to reload it. It's a huge step up, ready for consumers of modern shooters and immersive sims. Unfortunately, there's no clear information about how much ammo you have for your weaponry until you run out of it. Your weapons will also have multiple modes, but the guns don't indicate what those modes are, at least not particularly well. This is especially bad on the Spark laser gun, which has 3 modes, but only one of them looks different from the others at a glance. You can only tell the other 2 modes apart because of a tiny little light near the trigger guard. I don't know why they decided to obfuscate this information when it was so clearly available in the original game. There is one big problem with the new UI, and that is the liberal use of transparencies. Sure, it looks cool and futuristic and stuff, but there are times where, depending on what you're looking at in the environment, the UI blends directly into it. Several times I had to exit my inventory screen, turn to something with a darker background, and reopen it so I could just see what the hell I was doing. The game features accessibility options, but they're relatively minor things. They don't decrease the transparency of the menu panes or make world objects more visible, but you can adjust the curvature of the UI, so that's cool. You can even change the color scheme, but there was a bug here where it forgot what it was each time I reloaded the game. One big tweak that they made to the user experience for this reboot is the fact that all of the game's usable interfaces are diegetic. This means that you're actually pressing the actual in-world buttons to put in codes or solve puzzles, rather than dealing with abstracted interfaces like other games, or even the originals. It's a pretty neat idea. Mostly. The original game kicked off with an exposition-heavy cutscene that laid out in a few precious minutes who you are, why you're on Citadel Station, how you created Shodan in a Faustian deal with a corrupt Tri-Optimum executive, and then were put into cryosleep for a new military-grade implant for 6 months. For the remake, Night Dive felt like embellishing on this in a really big way. It doesn't quite do it for me. Yes, it fleshes out the new Atlanta you live in as you fly past in-world developer logos. It lets you look around your tiny apartment while your hack penetrates Tri-Optimum. And then their goons show up and bring you into corporate custody. It's more cinematic. It feels like a more colorful bait to lure in more casual, modern audiences, but it also feels really superfluous. This sequence does all this world building and then quickly tosses it away as you wander through dark, grid-based maze dungeons. If the game were a bit larger in scope, if there were some interesting or useful decisions you could make in this little introductory vestibule that would affect your character later on, maybe you wouldn't just feel like you were moving through the queue at a Universal Studios ride. Not helping is the lack of any kind of musical or audio punch when Tri-Op goons show up. It really just feels like you invited them in. The sound design has been thoroughly redone and for the better. Terry Brocious returned to the sound booth to re-record her lines as Shodan, and her edited presentation sounds much more like the chaotic mix of System Shock 2 with its trademark noise bed than the relatively plain glitches of the original game. But her lines aren't quite as edited or as intense as her communiques in the sequel, so her messaging isn't quite as stressful. They did implement some of the original sounds of the series elsewhere, and those are a fun little bonus. The writing appears to be largely redone from the original game as well, which is pretty great because it was pretty patchy at times. This is a big deal because there are still a lot of logs and communiques to dig into. The information density I had issues with in the demo seems to be addressed or danced around in the full game, so that's also a plus. There are new actors voicing these lines, and most of the profile pictures are animated, and I love them. At least one of them looks like Night Dive CEO Stephen Kick, but then as I was playing, I would find another one that does, and I just got confused. There are some employees who don't have animated faces at all, and I wonder why, beyond the fact that they didn't have profile pictures in the original game. The only trade-off here is that Warren Spector's cameo has been re-recorded by someone who isn't Warren Spector.
Paul, it's not just Gamma. There are hazardous leaks appearing all over the station.
Despite being stylistically different, the music of both of the original games was often loud, abrasive, and far too intense for my enjoyment, so the music volume got quickly muted in both. But for this remake, Night Dive went the opposite way, with a score that was so subtle and toothless that I usually forgot it was there. I'm sure there's some middle path they could have taken, but I'm no musician, what do I know? When you consider all these things holistically, it begins to settle in how much slower paced this game feels compared to the original as well. You really take your time with this remake, with more intimate combat, more detailed levels that constantly overwhelm your senses, and maybe even the speed of your character, at least until you start getting rocket boot upgrades. Playing this game really feels like you've set the playback speed to 0.5 or 0.75 compared to the original. This isn't inherently bad unless you're used to the more intense movement and action of, say, the latter-day Deus Ex games or maybe Prey. The drawback of the slower pace is story-related. The original game didn't lend itself to much narrative interaction, so slowing the game down really stretches out the gap between those milestones. This made me feel less connected to the story, even with all the boosted production values that 3 decades gave us. It makes the game feel more like a horror sandbox than ever, and when you're wandering lost through these levels, you feel just a little less engaged with what's going on moment to moment. But let's talk about the spicy stuff. Combat is so much spicier now. Holy crap, is it spicier. Night Dive went through a lot of effort to make a new gore system that allows you to blow up mutants and robots alike in really fun, specific ways that make each death somewhat unique. You can hack up limbs, headshots are incredibly satisfying, and robots blow up super good. It feels amazing because the violence feels more visceral and effective. The gunplay feels really good. It makes headshots vital and super fun no matter who you're fighting, unless they don't have heads. It feels good to squeeze off rounds from your tiny pistol or from the blobs of your late-game plasma rifle. This is the point where I'll point out that while you can use a controller in this game, and you'll obviously have to with the inevitable console ports, I wouldn't recommend it. Yes, I use a controller as often as possible for my reviews, but between using the right stick to navigate your inventory and the usefulness of pixel-precise gunplay, I would absolutely recommend using a keyboard and mouse instead. What doesn't feel great still 7 years later is the melee combat. It still doesn't feel right or very effective. You can charge up a swing, but there's no indication in the game that you've actually done so. Even then, despite the new gore and heavily physics-based combat models, your impacts feel weightless and ineffective. And then they die. You can pick up this laser rapier a third of the way through the game that takes up 1,000,000,000% of your screen space, and it doesn't feel useful unless you use drugs, apparently. I actually ditched all of my melee weapons entirely halfway through the campaign and experienced no penalty, except when I got a little anxious about my energy levels or ammo counts. Even then, I never yearned for my lead pipe or laser rapier. The combat-enhancing and even hallucinatory drugs of the original game return, and just like the original game, they went almost entirely unused outside of boss battles. Then and now, the game doesn't really incentivize you to use these things or teach you why you should, so I didn't. The reflex drug was the most useful, dropping the pace of the action and spawning hallucinations of old-school enemies. They could have replaced all the other drugs with reflex, and I would have probably used it more often. Boss battles are a tough thing to do in a game like this because, as I explored in my review for Deus Ex Human Revolution, they typically involve you employing all of your talents, abilities, and skills in a very precise and rapid way when you may not have been playing the game that way at all. That said, this game's quartet of boss battles are usually pretty good and set up in arenas that give you plenty of cover. The worst battle, honestly, was the first one against a Cortex Reaver when I hadn't acquired that much weaponry or ammo. I got by with a good bit of cheese as the Reaver got hung up on a corner. The trio of battles against Edward Diego were actually pretty good. That felt weird to say. Naturally, this highlights the game's serviceable but not amazing AI. Enemies are typically lethargic in acknowledging your presence, and it's pretty easy to knock enemies out by posting by a corner and leaning out to snipe them. For a game that inherits so much of the original game's clunkiness, this seemed fine to me, but I know others won't find it very rad. Also not very rad, the unskippable death animations when you don't have access to a respawn point that evoked terrible memories of the Valkyrie summon from To Human. I don't like it at all. While Night Dive felt the need to translate as much of the original game to the modern era, they did add one big mechanical wrinkle that will feel very familiar to fans of the second game, or basically any other modern immersive sim. This game is full of junk. So much junk. This is an immersive sim that isn't from Eidos Montreal, so naturally, the station is full of random crap that you can stuff into your pockets. When you're orienting yourself in that medical suite, fresh out of your cryotube, it's very tempting to fill your inventory with wash basins, scalpels, and tons of other random crap, and not know what to actually do with any of it. So, what do you do with it? Well, you recycle it for credits. Each item you pick up has 2 values, a credit score and a scrap score. 10 scrap is worth 1 credit. So it's easy to do some quick brain math to see that if something is worth 2 credits when recycled versus 5 scrap when vaporized, it's worth 4 times as much if you just toss it straight in the recycler versus vaporizing it and then recycling it. Of course, these values can be obfuscated at times because of the previously mentioned issues with the UI. When you recycle these things in a machine that looks very similar to the recycler from 2017's Prey, it dispenses little Donkey Kong coins for you to pick up. You can then use these Donkey Kong coins to buy stuff from the game's new vending machines, like snacks for health, drugs for healing, or for whatever, and even weapon modifications. These machines are all diegetic too, so you need to click on the coin slot to deposit coins, and then click the individual buttons you need to pick your selection. So that's neat too, I guess. I actually wish the vending machines threw the item a little further down the chute because you kind of have to dig into the machine a little to retrieve them. This is compounded if you buy multiple items at once and you're having to dig them all out from the slot. It's not a huge thing, but it is indeed a thing. Of course, you'll have tough decisions ahead around managing your inventory, which comes at a premium as you make your way through the game and fill it with more and more vital equipment. To even take advantage of this system, you have to find the single recycler in each level. Heaven forbid you're so full of random crap that you have to decide between running back to a previous level to recycle it all for useful currency so you have enough space to pick up a new gun you just found on the floor, or just ditch all that useless crap so you can get the new gun now. You can dance around this limitation by using the game's cargo lift dumbwaiter system to store a few extra things, or, I guess, just toss it into a random storage crate in the station and come back for it later. But that's just work. This system is okay. It's clunky, and by the time you understand it, you're running out of space to use it. Despite all my qualms with System Shock 2's economy of scarcity, nanites were so much easier to manage and use with all the busy work of converting coffee mugs into carbon cubes and then Donkey Kong coins. It's another thing to think about, and by the time you enter the last stages of the game, you no longer have any inventory space for any of it. I was throwing away my coins just so I could carry another kind of ammo I needed. It's the only economic system in a game I've played where the value in using it dwindles to 0 over time. It feels like Night Dive had just enough scope to build this thing, which wouldn't have been some small effort considering all the mechanics, props, vending machines, and interactions they needed to basically build it from scratch, but not nearly enough scope to really make it work. And then, how do I put this lightly? Cyberspace sucks. Cyberspace has always sucked in System Shock, but despite 30 years and a complete retool of the minigame for this release, it still sucks, just in a different, more elaborate way. Similar to the hacking minigames of System Shock 2 or the Eidos Montreal Deus Ex games, the first game's cyberspace sequences were designed to turn what would be something mundane, like opening a door, into a Lawnmower Man-esque mini-adventure. In 1994, technology made these very spare-looking and very strange-playing quasi-flight sims. They weren't designed to last very long, just long enough to give you a taste of Citadel Station's virtual hacking environments before bringing you back to the station itself. In 2020, Night Dive unveiled their entirely new cyberspace mechanic that wouldn't suck, and in fact was a tiny sample of something new and interesting. Playing like a Descent-like 6-staff shooter, you splashed bright digital antagonists in vibrant DDR digital caverns, and entered and exited via visually interesting 2001-esque transitions. This seemed neat at the time, and for the first few times you have to place your head in the cyberspace mount in this game, you might still think that. But you won't for long. The overwhelming color schemes of that demo seem to have been toned down, sometimes becoming a shimmering digital blah. These sequences truly feel like you're spelunking through a digital West Virginia coal mine. Cyberspace is chamber-based, spawning in waves of bad guys you have to dispatch before the gate drops and you can move on. The handful of bullet-spewing, Pac-Man-esque virtual combatants are bullet sponges, and it's easy to get pinned in a corner and overwhelmed when they spawn a bunch of them on you at a time, which requires you to constantly keep moving. Ultimately, your objective is to destroy a Descent-like glowing core to unlock something real back in the real world, while digital enemies take pot shots the whole time. These sequences become very, very long, and they can take between 5 to 10 minutes each. And that's if you don't fuck up. Death in cyberspace doesn't kill you in the real world, but it will make you rethink your priorities as you have to then take another 10-minute dive just to reach the third chamber in a linear sequence to unlock a single important door on the station. There's one sequence that places you in a central hub, and you have to visit 4 individual sub-chambers to destroy their cores. But the game doesn't mark off or even really visually distinguish which ones you've already done. There's no easy way to visually track your progress, even though the game places big visual landmarks on the horizon. These are long, boring, tedious, low-energy sequences. There's an acorn of fun in here somewhere, but these feel like they were developed independently of what the Night Dive team was doing topside on Citadel. I say this because there were times I spent so long zapping digital bad guys that when I finally destroyed whatever core I needed to destroy and made it to the exit port, I was actually disoriented as a player to what I was actually doing. On top of feeling underbaked mechanically and visually, they also feel technically clunky. The game features tunnels that automatically convey you between chambers that are sometimes populated with static enemies that damage your health if you run into them. These parts usually go too fast to make this a fun mechanic, so without much warning, because the game doesn't convey your depleting cyber health very well, you'll think the game is glitching you out of a tunnel wall when in reality, you just died. You can also bump into these tunnel walls as you're being moved, which doesn't seem like it should be possible, but it feels bad when it happens. It also doesn't help that enemies pop out of existence or don't pop out of existence, and some of them just linger in death, emitting sounds as if they're still there, when they're not. Cyberspace in this remake is an absolute disappointment. If you could accomplish these objectives by any other means, or if they made these sequences like 120 seconds long, however intense it got, I would absolutely recommend that.
Dr. Dorn?
We're transporting the prisoner from New Atlanta Sector 11. What's our destination?
Diego's office is requesting the prisoner. Make the handoff there.
Copy that.
Night Dive raised almost $1.5 million almost a decade ago to re-envision the original game for a new age. Along the way, they had to strike a balance between reinventing it and just redressing it. But when you release a title like this that's effectively a 1994 game in a thick 2023 trench coat, you can't help but wonder, who is this game for? This remake faces the same problem that all video game remakes face. How many different interoperable systems can you replace at once without alienating old fans while enticing new ones to come visit? You can redesign Citadel Station, but how much is that going to cost? If you can only afford to remake a few sections, which sections are the highest priority? To say that this game is a love letter to fans of the original is a bit of a cop-out. This is a cunning attempt to trick more casual players and onlookers into embracing the original classic, one of the best immersive sims of all time, the game that blew away Stephen Kick as a kid, while gradually disarming them from the fact that it lacks the creature comforts of modern games. While those new gamers may be fine with the cinematic intro, they may become unglued at the odd level layouts of medical and then research, as well as the obtuseness of the game's objectives, even with the lower difficulties. If those gamers are used to newer immersive sims, or are one of the many who have played the System Shock sequel and then never the original, there are gameplay systems that'll be missing here. This isn't a role-playing game, so there are no talent trees or character upgrades to boost your stats beyond items that you can pick up throughout the station. That meritocratic open-endedness, based less on how you spec your character and more on how diligently you explored the station, is what made the original game shine. But if you don't go in with an open mind, this can be very confusing. They don't make games like this anymore. They kinda never did. My initial impressions of this remake weren't great. Climbing out of the lower level's pit of despair makes the mid-game that much richer when you finally get some power and feel like you're owning the space. Until then, you're probably struggling. This is a game with massive ups and downs based purely on the fact that they relied so heavily on the original game's design for better and worse, but then also made a few of their own successes and mistakes along the way that were grafted right on top. Still, even with Night Dive's missteps, this is the definitive version of this game. I made a hearty recommendation a year and a half ago to go play the previous Enhanced Edition because it's such a good remaster of an iconic game, but Can you go back to the Enhanced Edition after this? Probably not. What playing that original game allows for is plausible deniability. There are a lot of things you can forgive about it because it looks the way it does and plays the way it does. Transferring those design and mechanical restrictions into a game that looks like it was made in 2023, even with the quality of life improvements they implemented, makes the whole package a bit less forgiving to modern palates. This remake still feels archaic at points. I know there are casual lookers on who are probing the waters to see if this game will be for them when the original game looks and feels as clunky as it does now, but I guarantee the core audience for this remake will be those who have played the original game in all its original glory, warts and all, and have already forgiven the remake of its inherited sins. Would this game have been better off if they had gone the full 9 yards and fully re-envisioned System Shock for modern audiences? Sure, but it clearly couldn't have been made. I mean, this took 7 years as it was. If you're willing to forgive the limitations of the first game that were carried 3 decades up through this remake, you are in for one of the most important immersive sim experiences ever made.
I am me.
I am
Hey everyone, this video might seem like a bit of a surprise because it was definitely a surprise to me. I had actually already recorded all of the voiceover for Giant Bomb. I was about to enter in production for it, and then I got the email code for this review. And I've got to spend a minute and talk about modern reviews, or video game reviews I should say, because they suck. And I know this is something I've said over and over again, but let me hang on. So I got the email code and the embargo was 2 weeks out. And so it's like, I never get codes for new games because I don't cover new games, but this one was particularly special because it was System Shock, and System Shock series review is like my most important, most popular video ever. So it was a rare opportunity for me to stretch my sea legs, I guess, and, really try something new. So I did. So I was like, all right, let me review this game and let me try and do it in 2 weeks and let me cut corners and try and figure things out and maybe ditch some stuff that, maybe it was, stuff that really helped me make the nth reviews really special. But you break things when you try new things. So anyway, so I played this game. I lost a whole bunch of sleep because I'm still working part-time for another job, and I'm like trying to get this review together, and I'm losing all of my weekend time, and I'm losing all of my night time, and I'm like having to functionally stop feeling good in order to actually take advantage of free time and stop and relax and go for a walk and that, because reviewing games like this where you're ingesting a 25-hour video game and then kicking out a review even if no one's is going to be as long as this one is absurd. And I have no idea how people get by week after week, year after year, and like crank out video game reviews like this quickly. It's absurd. You don't give the games any kind of justice when you're cramming them like this. It sucks. This sucks. Doing this sucks. It's not great. So I just had to say that, like, in preparing this, however long this thing's going to be, this 50-minute video for this game, like, to do that on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis every 2 weeks it's not good for the reviewer or the game player, and we really need to reset our expectations about when reviews show up in that, or give more people more lead time. Like, if I had a month to do this, it would be easier, but obviously I still wouldn't be able to do all of the things I needed to do to really make this robust nth review like I do the other games. So this was just my long rant to say that video game reviews are broken. They have been broken for a long time, and we really need to stop this bullshit. This sucks. So That was tough. Let me bring up the Patreon producers. There are so many Patreon producers that I had to stretch it out. It's pretty nuts. Woo! Anyway, thank you guys so much for supporting the channel, making this possible, even this review. Thanks my board member here, Pal Mazai. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. My producers, G-Man Lives, Lee Canyon, Mitchell, Rain101, Romega, Steven Brunwasser, Strupp, and Yahoo Silverman. That's right. That's right. So, thank you. If you haven't liked and subscribed already, do the algorithmic stuff. And I just want to thank you for watching this and continuing to watch this, even as I'm just saying words into a camera on a sunny afternoon where I am marooned because I'm trying to get this video out on Memorial Day weekend. It's like, seriously, the freaking embargo date is Memorial Day. I realize that I'm self-imposing this, but I also realize that I'm going back to the rant. I realize so much that people are having to impose these deadlines upon themselves just to make sure that they have a video out every week or two or every other, every month or so. And that's not healthy, especially, and I understand, like, you have families to support or whoever, but, like, seriously, this is bad for your mental health. Making game reviews this quick is nuts. You shouldn't be doing it this way. The industry shouldn't be doing this way. The culture should not be doing it this way. Patreon.com/TheNthReview. Thank you. All right, I'll see you next time.